told that some people steal out of necessity. They steal out of hunger, or if their children are in dire need, extreme poverty forces their hand. I personally don't know these people. I know a lot of people who have confessed to stealing who did not need to. And I'm talking about people whose basic needs were taken care of, but they stole because the opportunity to steal presented itself. They saw a chance to get ahead, and so they took it. That handful of grapes in the grocery store, that piece of candy that was lying around, that towel from the hotel room. The people I know who steal are middle class people who don't need to. They do it because they think they are clever and they can gain an advantage. In the short story Found Things, Sasha is on a date when she has to visit the ladies' room. She sees a wallet sitting there on the sink, and so she knows that it is not hers. It belongs to a woman who is in one of the stalls. She thinks to herself, it made me want to teach that woman a lesson. But this wish only camouflaged the deeper feeling I always had, that it seems so dull, so life as usual, to just leave it there rather than seize the moment. Accept the challenge, take the leap, fly the coop, throw caution to the wind, live dangerously. She steals out of a need for excitement, for the thrill of it. I have to wonder if the large thefts of money in the stock market, insider trading by people who already have large amounts of money, are motivated by this same kind of thinking. Theft for the thrill of it. Like I said, there must be some people out there who steal out of a sense of need. I just haven't met them yet. St. Augustine famously told the story about when he was a teenager and ran with a sketchy crowd called the Destructors. One night after the gang had finished playing sports in the streets of their neighborhood, their attention turned to a pear tree that was heavy with ripe fruit. The tree did not belong to any of their families, but it grew on a plot adjacent to that of Augustine's family. The boys did not find the pears tempting in their color or flavor. Nevertheless, they wanted to steal them. They went to the base of the tree and shook down the ripe pears. Augustine relates, we carried off a huge load of pears, not to eat ourselves, but to dump out to the hogs after barely tasting some of them ourselves. Doing this pleased us all the more because it was forbidden. Such was my heart, O God, such was my heart, which thou didst pity even in that bottomless pit. Behold, now let my heart confess to thee what it was seeking there when I was being gratuitously wanton, having no inducement to evil but the evil itself. Writing in his mid-40s, Augustine looked back on this theft and was struck by the fact that he didn't even want the pears. The natural law that he should not steal the property of others, this is what pushed him to steal the pears. He took a pear merely to throw it to the pigs, not for the pig's sake, but for the sake of his own desire to disobey. He explains his thinking this way. It was foul, and I loved it. I loved my own undoing. I loved my error. Not that for which I erred, but for the error itself. A depraved soul falling away from security in thee to destruction in itself, seeking nothing from the shameful deed but shame itself. If you have an honest soul, you can relate to this story in some way, committing evil just because you could. If you have an honest soul, then the story of Achan will affect you. Now, we don't hear about Achan very often. I don't remember any Sunday school songs about him. We could write a song about him. We'd call it Achan Breaking Heart. No, let's not do that. Achan's story is given an entire chapter right smack dab in the middle of Joshua's book. And it's not a happy story. You'll remember Joshua chapter 6 ended on a high note. Jericho had fallen, the writer recorded, so the Lord was with Joshua and his fame spread throughout the land. The promised land was then wide open before the people of Israel. The people were unstoppable. God was with Joshua, and if Jericho could fall, the rest of Canaan knew this, then no city would be safe. They would fall like dominoes. The first word of Joshua chapter 7 is but. But. That is not a good word to begin with following the sentence. So the Lord is with Joshua and his fame spread throughout the land. But what's going to follow can't be good. But I appreciate you as a friend, and I usually like your sense of humor, but you obviously put a lot of effort into this project, but I like your new hairstyle. But what happens in your mind when you hear that little word, that three-letter conjunction? One word can nearly negate whatever came before. So the Lord was with Joshua, and his fame spread throughout the land. We now are in Joshua chapter 7 and verse 1. But the Israelites were unfaithful in regard to the devoted things. Achan, son of Carmi, the son of Zimri, the son of Zerah of the tribe of Judah, took some of them. So the Lord's anger burned against Israel. Now you say, maybe this man was poor. No. The 24th verse of this same chapter lets us know that Achan had a wife, he had a family, he had oxen and donkeys and sheep and a tent. He had a place in the bloodline of Judah. He was about to take possession of land. He was middle class as far as we can tell, maybe even a slight step above. He was Sasha, stealing a wallet because it was there. He was St. Augustine, stealing pears just because he was tempted. He had heard Joshua's directive in chapter 6, but keep away from the devoted things so that you will not bring about your own destruction by taking any of them. Otherwise, you will make the camp of Israel liable to destruction and bring trouble on it. All the silver and gold and the articles of bronze and iron are sacred to the Lord and must go into his treasury. The message was clear. Don't take anything for yourself. No souvenirs, no gifts for the family. No, you don't need it. All the good stuff goes to God. Achan heard this, but he made a different decision for himself, and the consequences for the nation would be terrible. We pick up the story in Joshua chapter 7 and verse 2. Now Joshua sent men from Jericho to Ai, which is near Bethaven, to the east of Bethel, and told them, go up and spy out the region. So the men went up and spied out Ai. When they returned to Joshua, they said, not all the army will have to go up against Ai. Send 2,000 or 3,000 men to take it, and do not weary the whole army, for only a few people live there. So about 3,000 went up, but they were routed by the men of Ai, who killed about 36 of them. They chased the Israelites from the city gate as far as the stone quarries and struck them down on the slopes. At this, the hearts of the people melted in fear and became like water. This wasn't supposed to happen. God split the Jordan. God crumbled the walls of Jericho. Ai was just a spot on the map. The entire village only contained 12,000 people. Joshua sent a relatively small force to Ai, and this small force were driven back. 36 men died. This isn't how the script was written. What happened? And so Joshua did what you would expect any God-appointed fearless leader to do after experiencing a setback. He had a meltdown. He tore his clothing, he fell on his face, and he whined to God like a child. Verse 6. Then Joshua tore his clothes and fell face down to the ground before the ark of the Lord, remaining there till evening. The elders of Israel did the same and sprinkled dust on their heads. And Joshua said, Alas, sovereign Lord, why did you ever bring this people across the Jordan to deliver us into the hands of the Amorites to destroy us? If only we had been content to stay on the other side of the Jordan. Pardon your servant, Lord. What can I say now that Israel has been routed by its enemies? The Canaanites and the other people of this country will hear about this, and they will surround us and wipe out our name from the earth. What then will you do for your own great name? You know, there's a tone of accusation there in these verses, in his prayer, like God had set him up for failure. I'm not sure if I like this little prayer. It stinks of doubt. It's not easy to be a leader. Sometimes things happen that confuse the leader. God did not mean for Joshua to fail, and so he set him straight in verse 10. The Lord said to Joshua, "Stand up. What are you doing down on your face? Israel has sinned. They have violated my covenant, which I commanded them to keep. They have taken some of the devoted things. They have stolen. They have lied. They have put them with their own possessions. That is why the Israelites cannot stand against their enemies. They turn their backs and run because they have been made liable to destruction. I will not be with you anymore unless you destroy whatever among you is devoted to destruction. Go consecrate the people. Tell them, consecrate yourselves in preparation for tomorrow, for this is what the Lord, the God of Israel, says. There are devoted things among you, Israel. You cannot stand against your enemies until you remove them. In the morning, present yourselves tribe by tribe. The tribe the Lord chooses shall come forward clan by clan. The clan the Lord chooses shall come forward family by family. And the family the Lord chooses shall come forward man by man. Whoever is caught with the devoted things shall be destroyed by fire, along with all that belongs to him. He has violated the covenant of the Lord and has done an outrageous thing in Israel." I think it's interesting that God didn't just tell Joshua directly, it was Achan. He took my stuff. Instead, this becomes a very dramatic ceremony to make an example out of somebody who is intentionally disobedient. Not ignorant, but willfully rebellious. Obedience was more important than ever as God's people were moving in to take possession of God's land. Joshua followed God's direction. He did a tribe by tribe, then family by family, then man by man review until Achan confessed. Take your Bible, skip down to verse 19. Then Joshua said to Achan, "My son, give glory to the Lord, the God of Israel, and honor him. Tell me what you have done. Do not hide it from me." Achan replied, "It is true. I have sinned against the Lord, the God of Israel. This is what I have done. When I saw in the plunder a beautiful robe from Babylonia, 200 shekels of silver, and a bar of gold weighing 50 shekels, I coveted them and took them. They are hidden in the ground inside my tent with the silver underneath." Can we recreate this scene in our minds? Along with other soldiers, Achan is walking through the fallen city of Jericho. The residents of Jericho, they have been killed, and there are pieces of broken walls lying everywhere. All the stuff of the residents is exposed, the gold, the jewelry, the garments. Everyone else remembered God's commands. They remembered what Joshua had said. They saw the treasures there lying on the ground and kept going. Others saw, others must have been tempted, but only Achan took. He knew it was wrong. He must have looked around. He must have had that sinking feeling in his stomach as he stashed his stuff. How much stuff? A robe? Silver? A gold bar? As much as he could hide on his person. And he must have had a hard time concealing it and sneaking it back to his tent. In fact, this detail is not in the story, but I wonder if Achan snuck his stuff back at that time, or if he had to hide it and then come back later that night. Because it seems like a valuable Babylonian robe might not be easy to conceal in the day as they marched back to camp after a very long excursion. Achan saw, the Bible said. Achan coveted, the Bible said. He admitted it, and Achan took. Like David, who saw Bathsheba and coveted her and took her. Like Judas, who wanted a little something for himself. This theft came from a lack of trust in God's provision and a disregard for God's command. Let me make 2 quick points here. Number 1, Promised Land people trust God. This is what set the generation apart from the one before, the one that didn't trust, the one that was doomed to wander in the wilderness for 40 years. The next generation was the promised land generation. They were different. They trusted God. They walked by faith. Now, Jesus once said, the work of God is this, to believe in the one he sent. Everything begins with faith. The wilderness years were missing faith. Promised land living is all about faith. Faith will compel God to split rivers, to demolish strongholds, to preserve families like Rahab's that chose him over the world. Joshua had faith. The people of God trusted God completely, except for Achan. Second lesson. Your failure to trust God negatively affects others. In this case, 36 people died because Achan didn't trust God completely. His sin did not affect only him, it affected his family, as you'll see in a minute. It affected other people's families. 36 families had lost their daddies because of his sin. The punishment came quickly, and it was severe, as it needed to be for the future of the nation. Skip down to verse 24. Then Joshua, together with all Israel, took Achan, the son of Zerah, the silver, the robe, the gold bar, his sons and daughters, his cattle, donkeys, and sheep, his tent, and all that he had, to the valley of Achor. Joshua said, why have you brought this trouble on us? The Lord will bring trouble on you today. Then all Israel stoned him, and after they had stoned the rest, they burned them. Over Achan they heaped up a large pile of rocks, which remains to this day. Then the Lord turned from his fierce anger. Therefore that place has been called the Valley of Achor ever since. Achor means trouble. God is jealous for your trust. He doesn't request it or suggest it or recommend it. He expects it, especially after he has proven himself faithful in your life. Your failure to trust God affects others in a negative way. None of us live our life in isolation. Every time you sin, it's like dropping a pebble into the calm surface of water and watching the ripples extend in concentric circles. Your sin touches the people all around you. You cannot sin without hurting others. As I was preparing this lesson, I immediately thought of 5 fantastic, heartbreaking personal stories to share that really drive this point home. But I'm afraid that someone watching this video might figure out who I'm talking about. And that's too bad, because I've got some powerful stories of this principle in action that I can't share. So I'll share some common examples of this principle. Your failure to trust God affects others in a negative way. Common examples are this. If a pregnant woman uses drugs while she is pregnant, does she alone experience the effects, or does the baby suffer too in her belly? If a father is mean and angry and abusive, does he hurt only himself or also his wife and children? If a teenager is disrespectful and rude to every authority figure in his life, does he hurt only himself or also those who are trying to help him? God could have arranged things in a way that our sin never affected anyone else. God could have arranged things in a way that we alone would bear the consequences of our actions. But what kind of world would that be? Think about it. The pregnant woman abuses her body with drugs, but her baby is born healthy and alert and with no ill effects. A man is mean and aggressive, but his actions don't damage his wife's sense of self-worth, and his children grow up to be completely normal with no baggage to carry into their own marriages and families. A teenager's hurtful words and attitudes have zero effect on his parents, his teachers, his counselors. What a world that would be, where everyone's choice only affected themselves. But that's not how the world works, and we know it. If we alone bore the consequences of our actions, we wouldn't think twice about disobeying God, since we'd never be hurting anyone but ourselves. By seeing others, and especially those we love, hurt because of our sin, we learn to think of others instead of thinking only of ourselves when we make decisions. By suffering when someone else has sinned, we learn to recognize that it's important to hold other people accountable for their actions. And we learn to value community more. We learn to love each other with our words and our actions. One more lesson, and then we'll bring in a New Testament example. Nothing breeds failure like success. And I wish it weren't that way, but it is. Adrian Rogers used to call this the principle of the devil after the dove. And he was referring to Jesus' baptism when the heavens opened and his Father spoke, and then Jesus immediately went into the wilderness to be tempted. We can be tempted when we're down and out, but we also can be severely tempted when we are feeling the afterglow of a great victory. After Jericho came Ai. After the mountaintop comes the descent into the valley. In the book of Acts, we see the Christian church experiencing a phenomenal season. Miracles and sermons and baptisms and exponential daily growth. And then chapter 5 introduces us to two Achans, a married couple, Ananias and Sapphira. Like Achan, they seem to be reasonably well off. Like Achan, they stole what they knew belonged to God. They pledged to sell some property and give the money to the church, and it didn't seem to be under any kind of forced compulsion. Like Achan, they cheated and lied. Like Achan, they died. One and then the other. The Bible says great fear seized the whole church and all who heard about these events. Like Achan, this couple seemed to be living in the promised land, and now I'm being both literal and metaphorical. They lived in Palestine, the promised land, but they were also part of the church. They were Christians. They were God's people. Ananias and Sapphira were living in the success days of the early church. They didn't steal out of a sense of need. They stole out of a sense of greed. I share this with you, this additional example, because their deaths remind us to be careful, to not trust in stuff. I mean, even our money preaches to us, in God we trust. And when we trust in anything other than God, even in our own shrewdness, we do so to our own peril. The Apostle Paul wrote to Timothy, "Command those who are rich in this present world not to be arrogant, nor to put their hope in wealth, which is so uncertain, but to put their hope in God, who richly provides us with everything for our enjoyment." Now I know what you're thinking. You say, "I'm not rich in this world." Yes, you are. If you have enough education to understand this lesson, you are rich. And if you are watching this on your own computer, you are rich. As best as we can determine, only 10% of the world's population owns their own personal computer. So if you have one, that automatically puts you in the top 10% of worldly wealth. About a third of the world's population, 34%, have access to the internet. So again, you are in the top category. By worldly standards, you are prosperous. And you shouldn't feel guilty about that, but you should be careful. Because nothing breeds failure like success. You will be tempted to cheat, to steal, to gain an advantage, and you don't need to give in to that temptation because you are part of the Promised Land generation. The story of Joshua leading Israel into Canaan is more than just a historical account about a military conquest. It's a picture of how every child of God has come out of Egypt, which pictures a lost person, and how we should not be content to live in the wilderness, a picture of the carnal Christian life. Instead, we should cross over into the promised land, the victorious Christian life. In the book of Romans, Paul says we are more than conquerors through him who loved us. We are living and walking and breathing in victory in Jesus. Christian, when there is personal sin in your life, you won't be more than a conqueror. You may gain a personal advantage, but you will be living in defeat. You'll be living in ruin. You won't have victory over your temper. You won't have victory over your mouth. You won't have victory in your relationships. You will lose those little AI battles each time you fight them. Battles you think you should be able to win easily. You will be running in defeat and as a result confused and in meltdown. If you are wondering, why am I not living the victorious Christian life? Why am I not claiming all these blessings that God has promised? The best thing to do is to be honest before God and ask Him if there is any personal sin in your life. See if there's anything that you are hiding. Search me, O God, and know my heart. Test me and know my anxious thoughts. See if there is any offensive way in me, and lead me in the way everlasting.